I came across this story almost a decade back, and for some very obvious reasons, a good excerpts of it has stayed with me till now, and like it's a good refresher to keep going back to and ponder. Uh, to I, some of you might be familiar with this Italian author. He goes by the name of Ernesto Siloli. Uh, just like everyone else, like us and the Western countries, everybody was pained and is pained by the hunger and starvation that is prevalent in Africa. So there's this non-profit organization that thought that, okay, like we need to do something about it. And as a response to it, the organization decided to flew down to Zambia, location in Africa. And across the Zambezi River, they came across a very fertile land. So it's a very beautiful river, and across that there's a very fertile land. And the moment they reached, they were like, "Oh my God, this is such a fertile land. Why is it that people in Zambia and in Africa are actually starving?" Right? To address the problem, they were like, "Okay, like today, now we are going to teach the Africans as to how to do the agriculture." So they got some of the best seeds from across the globe. They thought they plan to do a plantation of tomatoes and zucchini. They were like, okay, like we are going to teach Zambians how to do agriculture. So for all the obvious reasons, the local immersion was very less, and sometimes they would ask local to turn up, and when they would pay them, some people would turn up. They would help them on the fields, help them with the work, and and for considering the land was so fertile, it did had like a really solid plantation, right? And typically, like the tomatoes that we eat over in India or outside as well, like it's of this size. Zucchinis would be of this size, but in Africa, because of the fertile land, they were this big, and the tomatoes were this big, and the Italians were very happy. They were like, "Oh wow, like these folks did not know how to do agriculture. Now we are teaching them, and we have saved a big chunk of population from starvation." So just when the uh, tomatoes and the zucchini started to ripen, they became red and juicy and all. One overnight, uh, some odd 200 hippos came and they ate the entire plantation. And the Italians went bonkers. They were like, they started shouting, Zambians, the hippos. And to which Zambians responded, yeah, that's the reason why we don't have agriculture. To which the Italian asked, why didn't you tell us? Because story is because of the reason why we are here today. Right? The truth is, all of us that are working in non-profit in the development sector, we have really solid intent with the work that we do, with the community that we engage with, but most often not, the outcomes are not as desirable as we want. And a lot of times, like we end up doubting ourselves, we doubt our capacities, we doubt our capabilities. There is a big amount of pressure from funders, and most importantly, we have distressed beneficiaries or the demography that we engage with, as a result of which either the program, the project die, or there is a constant stress that the program and the organization keep on taking. uh, I actually wanted to do a an activity with all of you. Would love participation from all of you. So on your screen, you would see a problem definition. Just by having a quick glance through it, what do you think are the some of the obvious or out there gaps that you are able to identify? The problem statement is it's by some organization I'm not going to name, but we need to start a new program to give free laptops to students because they need more technology. What do you think are, you can put it on the chat box, or if somebody wants to voice it out, you can unmute and speak as well. Let's take a minute. Solid. There is somebody by the name of Dell. I think it would be great if you can rename it, but lack of infrastructure. but who is going to teach and how to use it, and do they even want it? Solid. Tech education, access to internet. Wow. Electricity issues, expert teachers to teach them, other need are more important than this want. Solid. I think quite a lot of us are actually on a similar page, right? When I looked at this uh, problem identification, although like well-meaning, right? Like you want to give free laptops, sure. Like it's the intention is good, but there are some obvious gaps that are emerging out, right? One of them is definitely lack of need assessment. In no way the problem identification is giving in evidence that there is a lack of technology or the student actually need laptop, right? Or whether there are any alternative available outside laptops. The target is very ill defined. If you look at it, it's a blanket statement that says we need to give laptops, but whom do we need to give laptops? Are we talking about underserved communities? Are we talking about children in need of care and protection? Are we talking about elementary groups? Are we talking about high school students? Are we talking about college students? Because if you look at it, different age brackets will have a different technological needs, right, depending upon the demography that you are going to serve. Quite evidently, there is a lack of understanding of the impact, right? There is no mention of how laptops are actually going to solve the problem, how this is actually going to enable the learning growth, or how it is going to bridge that gap of technology for the students, and where it is targeted at as well. Another quite obvious challenge is that there is no mention of stakeholders, right? Quite obvious stakeholders here would be the students, the teachers, the education experts. There is no mention, there is no consultation that is coming out in the problem identification. Alongside that, as I mentioned, although the intention might be good, but it's a very unfocused solution. It's like uh, operating with a thought process that if we are to provide laptops, somehow magically it will work out, it will solve the problem. There is no consideration of sustainability, there is no consideration of cost efficiency, nothing. It's just a flat approach uh, that is implemented. One of the reasons why we spent some time on the study and this problem identification is because most often not, if you look around, we do as a non-profit, as entrepreneurs, we do see a lot of these things coming up around us, and most often not, instead of benefiting the beneficiary, it ends up making life more difficult for them because of a lot of additional processes that we end up entailing on them. How do we break out of this vicious cycle that a lot of organizations, the rut that we keep running into, brings us to feasibility. But before we expand on this topic, would love to hear from you folks as to what is your current understanding of feasibility in your language, in your understanding. What do you understand by feasibility? You can again use the chat box or unmute yourself and talk. Got it. Should serve the purpose in a realistic manner. Feasibility is something that is doable and is needed. Solid. If I was to explain it in a very simple language, right? Feasibility is getting an understanding the idea that you have. Is it doable or is it not doable? It's essentially about doing your homework right, doing your homework well before you go ahead and commit your resources, your time, your effort, your money in conceptualizing an idea or execution of an idea in a very development sector orientation point of view. It's knowing whether, okay, this program has potential, doesn't have potential, whether it serves the need of the beneficiary that you are that you are oriented towards. Is the program going to be sustainable? Is it or whether you will have support from the community and the stakeholders to execute it. That's essentially what a feasibility is, right? And the first and foremost element of feasibility is the need analysis, right? Like how we look at the other two, the story that I spoke about, and the uh, quick problem identification that we did, right? Need analysis in its truest form means understanding the problem to its full potential, where you are actually getting the full understanding of the problem. You have an holistic understanding of the pain points that are existing, and accordingly you are building solutions, you are building objectives around it. There are multiple elements, tools, and all those things that are involved. But broadly, if you look at it, there are four broad elements in which we can talk about need analysis. There are four major elements. The first and the foremost being identifying the stakeholders, understanding the problem, doing your research well, and prioritization and problem benchmarking. Uh, Let me actually take an example of a non-profit, in my opinion, that has done need analysis well. So this organization essentially works with rural communities, and particularly children in rural communities. As part of the in villages, as part of their need analysis, they laid out the objective, which was to understand the learning outcomes and the literacy in the community in a particular village. They identified various stakeholders. For them, some of the obvious stakeholders would be was the children that are there, the parents, the guardians, the school, the local authorities that are there, the broader framework of panchayats and all those things, which is majorly talking about the legal setup in the community. They identified the stakeholders and they build relations with those stakeholders, which is like an essential part. A lot of times we tend to move away from that, or we miss that element. Uh, as Similarly, like depending upon the work that you are doing, it is critical that you are actually able to identify the right stakeholder that are there. There is one primary stakeholder, which is the direct beneficiary that you might be working with. For example, if you are a non-profit that works with children in need of care and protection, then like one obvious stakeholder for you is the child, right? Or the or maybe like the childcare institution, right? But alongside that, there might be a lot of other stakeholders who, in some ways, has an influence on the child or on the overall setup of the demography that you are willing to serve. Coming back to this organization that I was talking about, to understand the problem, they made use of various tools, technologies, things like surveys, focus group discussions, one-on-one interviews, in-depth interviews, a lot of qualitative, quantitative analysis to develop insights, and accordingly came up with some understanding as to what are the overlining or overarching problems that are actually existing in the community. One thing that is very important when you are doing a need analysis, that one, the objective is clear, the stakeholders are well defined, and you know what are the tools that are required. You are making the best use of technology. You are tailoring your tools according to the community need, according to the stakeholders that you are intervening, that you tend to serve or that you intend to serve. You tailor your uh, tools to get the develop the understanding. Now, this particular organization, after they did like some level of primary research by understanding the problem, engaging with the community, engaging with children and the broader stakeholders, they came back, they did a thorough research to like the second-hand research, and try to understand what are the broader frameworks uh, of of rural communities, of educational gaps that exist in India or in this particular sector at large. And what it essentially did is, the reason why it is critical and important is that it is able to validate or invalidate a lot of your assumptions. Alongside that, when you are doing this, you are able to develop a holistic understanding of the problem at large. What are the major influences that are prevailing? What are a lot of other government policies, non-government organizations that are actually trying to work towards it, if there are any, picking up those practices from their understanding, what's working out, what's not working out. And broadly, by this time, it gives you a trend. okay, what are the broader trends of problem that are emerging out of the demography, right? And uh, once you have completed these three steps, it essentially brings us to the fourth element, which is problem prioritization and benchmarking. The truth is, there are a lot of problems out there, but it is critical to understand what are the essential and the most important or the most critical core drivers that are actually resulting into those problems, right? And how do you even want to bench, how do you even prioritize that? Now for this particular organization, after conducting building relations with the stakeholders, understanding the problem, doing research, what essentially came out was uh, the literacy rates are lower in the community, in the village, one because of high dropout rates, particularly with the female students, with the girl child in the community. Alongside, there is a massive lack of infrastructure, and there is no supplement or awareness at a family or parental side which can supplement the education for the child. And this essentially gave them a broader objective or framework that, okay, like these are the broad elements that we need to cater towards, instead of individually looking at one problem each and coming up with a problem statement that is difficult to define or to even make sense of. Once this side, essentially once this is run, then is when they went ahead, they did some solid benchmarking, which was essentially with some of the best practices that are existing outside the community or for that demography, and some other uh, 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 the ideal case scenarios, right? So that benchmarking, and what it essentially does is that it gives you a slightly defined objectivity or assessment as to what is it that you are oriented towards, right? When you say that, okay, like you want to uh, bridge better learning outcomes, then what does that actually mean, right? If you sit and try to refine it, like it is not actually giving any data, because there is no baselining, there is no understanding as to what is it that you want to orient towards. It's like shooting an arrow in the dark, right? If it hits, it hits. If it hits, you might not even know, because it's very difficult to know like what actually works, what doesn't work. At this point, at this juncture, it is critical that you are able to benchmark your problems well. There are wide variety of tools that are there. You can make use of it, be it be from a grading point of view, be it be giving weightages, be it be giving pointers, developing understanding in the form of, okay, what is urgent, what is the most critical thing that needs to be addressed at this point of time. And uh, one important element when you are doing this exercise is there has to be a critical focus on the beneficiary. A lot of times when we are looking at the problem, we tend to get swarmed by so many things that are happening. Oh, like we need to please the funder, we need to do this, we need to help work out with this administration, we need to work out this administration, and it becomes a massive paradox. What I essentially mean by that paradox is that it's like a playing field where the beneficiary is at some place, the funder has its own objective, the organization has its own objective, and there is no space where everybody is able to come together, and that becomes a massive paradox in the sector. So what you essentially need to keep in mind when you are doing this is that the focus at the beneficiary level is strong. You are able to assess the need, you are trying to think from their lens. That the best you can do is try to imagine from their lens and trying to build on top of it. Uh, Once you have completed the need analysis side of it, essentially by this time, there is some better understanding of the problem that is there. There is some objective that is emerging out, right? Like in the case of the organization that we discussed, for them, it became that, okay, like we need to ensure that children, the female students are not dropping out. We need to do some fortification about the infrastructure of schools and create awareness at the community level to ensure that the children go to the school. Uh, Once that element is completed is when we come to the resource feasibility side of it. Like very straightforward, what it essentially means is that, do I have, as an organization, do we have the resources, are the resources existing to take up on the task, right? That is what it means. Now in this particular element, the first side of it is resource identification. In fact, just for this conversation, let me take an example of another organization which in my understanding did a really solid job with respect to resource identification, right? This particular organization works in rural communities, but their objective is more to do with respect to providing clean and safe water to the rural communities. Now for them, the most evident resources that came out, one, okay, what are the clean sources of water that are available in the communities, right? uh, what is the infrastructure that is actually required? What kind of machineries are actually required for us to ensure that we are able to provide safe and drinking water, right? What are the cultural norms of the community? Do the organization engaged with volunteers? Do we have the volunteers who would be willing to take upon this task, or who would be excited, or will we be able to find the volunteers? Uh, and is this in lieu with our broader objective as an organization? Is it in line with our mission statement? Will the funders or our community members are going to back it? Do we have the resources that are required, essentially? So it's about mapping all the required essential resources that are needed to ensure that there is a holistic understanding uh, of the requirement that is coming out clearly. Right. So you do the resource identification, and depending upon the problem, depending upon the work that you do, there will be different resources. There would be different elements that would come out for you as an organization, as an individual. Uh, in this conversation, we will not dwell too deep into okay, what are the some of the tools that we are going to be making. You can make use of it and all, but the broader framework exists. Once you have done the resource identification, is when we come to the organization capacity. What we mean by organization capacity over here would be, uh, as an organization, do I have the capabilities? Can the organization, with its existing resource, take up the project, take up the program, and execute it? Or do I have the potential of those resources that exist as an organization? For the organization that I was talking about earlier, for them, it essentially entailed, uh, do I have the human power that is required to set this up? Uh, for them, what came out clearly that okay, they need more project managers, they need more engineers that are required to do this. They need community engagement specialists who can work with this particular community and uh, uh, leverage those sides of things alongside uh, another resource that come outside the staffing, even from a volunteering point of view. Do we have the volunteers that are there who will be able to execute this, or who will be able to take this up? Alongside that, do I have do we have the financial feasibility to take this up? What it essentially means is that, do we have the required funding? How much this is actually going to cost us to even execute, bring it out of the paper, right? So typically, like for any organization, depending upon the work that you are taking up, you need to develop a holistic understanding of your organization capacity. And one thing that you have to be mindful about is, uh, at what cost you want to take up a new project, right? Whether it is coming at the cost of where you hamper your existing programs. Are you looking at stressing out your existing resources, and to what degree that's going to happen, and what are the risks that are going to emerge out of that? The other element that you do at a resource feasibility level is a risk assessment for this organization, considering that their work primarily pertain with environment, like doing a risk assessment at a environment level. They did like a solid risk assessment with respect to, okay, whether this will disrupt the biodiversity. How will we have the clean water resources, right? What are the cultural norms at a local level with respect to innovations, with respect to changing infrastructure, whether we have the required funding, right? Whether the donors are going to back us up, not going to back us up, our existing fundings are not looking like, but like essentially like doing like a risk assessment depending upon the program that you are planning to take. Once that side of it is complete, is when another element that comes out strongly over here is financial analysis, which is, by at this stage, what you would essentially want to do is develop a solid understanding of what's the overall cost that's going to come out for the said organization. Let's say, like for them, it primarily would be that okay, like we need to pay off the salaries, we need to buy equipment, we need to do a lot of engagement, we need to do a lot of hiring, we need to do a lot of shifting of our resources, hiring, and all those things, and that's essentially the cost that is coming out. But for you as an organization or an individual who's planning to take up the task of this, like at this point of time, like developing a solid budget, making solid budget is something that's going to be crucial. Developing an understanding about your funding status, whether this is going to be sustainable, not sustainable, whether we have the resources to run it or not. So that's another component that we do at a resource feasibility level. Once this side of things are complete, essentially by the end of it, you should have a report, like a solid feasibility report that is able to communicate back certain questions to you. The first of it is the program that I am planning to take is is it actually going to serve the need of the beneficiary, right? What we are taking up at the need analysis level. Is it doable with the existing resources, or do I have the space or the potential where I'm able to tap into other resources? The third and the foremost element that comes in, is it going to yield positive returns for all the relevant stakeholders, including yourself, right? What it essentially means is that whatever project you are doing, is it yielding benefit to the stakeholders? Is it yielding benefit to the organizations? Is it yielding benefit to the community? Is the community engaged, not engaged? And another element being, is the program sustainable or not? A lot of times we do tend to come up with really solid ideas, things like that. Like, okay, you look at a distressed community and like we need to do something really great about it. Then you go about building out a mammoth project, uh, bringing out mammoth task and all those things. But by the end of it, you're like, okay, like the idea was good, but it is actually not sustainable. There is no point space where we can actually go about even scaling this solution. Uh, if at this stage, uh, if you get a if the report is communicating back to you that okay, like as an organization, we do have the resources to go ahead, then we move to the next part. If the report is coming back and saying that hey, doesn't look like that we have the existing resources, then like it is actually useful to go back and relook at the program design, relook at the problem statement altogether, relook at what are the refinement that are actually required instead of directly jumping into the execution side of things. Uh, and as I mentioned, like in case if the feasibility report is saying that okay, like it makes sense for us to move forward, then we come to the next part of building things out. And the first element of it is mapping of resources, right? Uh, 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 and at this stage, like what you would also essentially want to do is like bring out build out and bring out your logic framework, set up your smart goals, and there are a few other pointers that comes into it, which is essentially like mapping resources, building capacity, defining outcomes, set timelines, defining monitoring and evaluation criteria. Let's take one by one. Mapping resources, what we essentially mean by this is whatever project you are taking, what are the resources that the organization has at this point of time? Are we able to map it, uh, those resources? Now, this essentially include right from the lens of staffing to volunteers, to funds, to your budgets, to your marketing campaigns, everything that is required with respect to the new idea project that you are taking. You map the resources depending upon the project that you are taking up, right? The other element that comes out over here is building capacity, right? What it essentially means is that if you are taking up a new project, right, like a overexploited notion that one size fits all, that is doesn't necessarily work in all aspects, especially like in the development sector spaces. So, for example, let's say like you are a nonprofit that is inclined towards building digital literacy programs for a rural community, right? At this stage, like some obvious capacity building that would be required would be like staffing, right? You will need to ensure that you have the right staff, you have the people who operate with the right technical context to be able to deliver that. They have the right trainings. You will need to do a lot of teacher training programs. You will need to actively engage the communities, XYZ number of things that are required. Alongside that, another element that you need to focus on over here would be that you are able to define outcomes. Now, if you were to take the same example of like a digital literacy program, right? At this stage, like you need to have like really smart goals. What we mean by smart over here would be like something that is specific, that there's a specificity that is attached to the goal. They are measurable, they can be attained in a given period of time, they are relevant, and they are time bound. Like an example of a smart goal over here would be that the learning outcomes of the children increase by 30%, right? Now, the assumption over here is that there is a baselining that is already done. And what we are achieving towards is that within a year, the learning there's a 30% increase at a learning level for the demography that you tend to serve, right? And at this stage, like you would want to go ahead and define a lot of your KPIs. What are those indicators, right? An example of an indicator at this stage would be that there is a better engagement that is happening at classes, right? There are more tools that are coming into play. So you define your indicators solid. And another element that comes over here is setting timelines. A lot of times where organizations, like large scale organizations, small scale organizations that run into in a cycle is that there is no specific time period, right? You came up with a project and now it's just out there. It's a blanket thing that you want to do, and there is no specificity, there is no time period that is attached to the entire project, which essentially limits us as an organization to even evaluate, right? Or to even get an understanding whether this actually works, doesn't work, what stage the program should be in, right? Whether it is an ideation stage, whether it's a design stage, at what stage the execution should be happening, what are those milestones that you are trying to achieve, right? Now, for the same example that I was referring to, right, a digital literacy program for them, like let's say like a well-defined milestone would be that by X date, training for teachers is completed. By X rate, this much X 70% adoption is completed, right? So those specific milestones and metrics is something that needs to come out, and it needs to be very well defined in a timeline to be able to work and make better sense of the entire project. Alongside that is when we move into the monitoring and evaluation criteria, like very straightforward. What it essentially means is having those required systems, having those required tools, which are readily able to give feedback about your project, about the program that you are running. In a The broader objectivity around it is whether the program that you have designed is there any impact that is emerging out of it? What is the effectiveness of the program that you are doing? Whether it is actually delivering at what degree it is delivering, whether it is delivering at an efficient level or not, right? Whether it is relevant, right? You might be doing XYZ number of things, right? But there could be different elements that might be playing out, which might be impacting the beneficiary altogether. And then there is a strong bubble that ends up forming that, okay, like whatever we are doing is actually making sense. Like this is massively changing the demography, this is massively changing the life outcomes, and it makes absolute sense. So you would want to definitely have like a strong relevance, whether it is there, and alongside that, whether it is sustainable or not. So at this point, like having like a strong monitoring and evaluation tool is something that is going to be critical. Once we have covered that side of things, um, like there is a quote that says like fail fast, learn fast, and innovate fast, right? So a lot of times what ends up happening is like a lot of us, right, we tend to directly launch the program. We try to scale the program as quickly as possible without testing it out, without understanding whether it actually works or not. We invest a lot of resources, and later in the years we realize that like there are massive changes that need to be made at a program level. It is not functioning as how we want it. At this level, what essentially is required is that there is some level of design testing that is there. The assumption over here is that there is already a monitoring and evaluation tool that you have developed. There is a strong outcome understanding that is there. Before you roll out to the entire demography, the like a good practice over here would be that you test it out, right? There are set roles, you build out the criteria that are required, you test out the program uh, with a subset of the demography with your resources in a control mechanism way, get the feedback whether it is actually working, not working, make the necessary make use of your monitoring and evaluation tools, do active impact assessment of the program, and not only from the beneficiary point of view, but whatever stakeholders are involved in your program, right? Be it be, let's say, like a teacher, be it be the volunteers, be it be any stakeholders, to see like how efficiently the program is actually working out. Most often not, by this stage, there are a lot of learnings that emerge out. And monitoring and evaluation and testing is something which is an iterative process. You keep going back, you keep learning, you keep going back, you keep learning. A good objectivity over here would be that once you have done your impact assessment, it gives back a lot of understanding. You come back, you are able to do some level of design refinement at a program level, whatever is relevant, and then go into a space where we are able to look at piloting the program and potentially explore scalability. I feel like scalability in its truest form is like a different topic altogether, and maybe like some other day we can ponder on that. But I think essentially, like, just from a feasibility point of view, the broader elements that are required to be kept in mind is that you you are developing an understanding at your capacity level, you are understanding the capacity at a larger framework level, develop the right insights, and before committing a lot of resources, before committing a lot of time, energy, and ending up at a cliffhanger at a later stage, there is a value proposition that you do a lot of these assessments at an earlier stage. And as I mentioned, planning and everything is an iterative process. We keep going back to it, we keep learning from it, and make better decisions. With that, I think I would like to conclude the presentation side of this conversation, of this session. I'm just going to open it out to anyone, to all of you. If you have any questions, any thoughts, feel free to share it across. We'll be more than happy to engage.
Thank you so much, Saqib. It was very insightful and helpful for us to understand how to design programs successfully. We are going to keep it open to our participants. If you have any question or any query pertaining to the topic and you would like to ask Saqib, please raise hand and we would be happy to answer your query. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. This is Muralidhar from Hyderabad. I have a small question. As you mentioned regarding this digital literacy program, so everybody knows about this digital literacy program, not yet penetrated to the grassroots level of the rural environment, and then everybody wants to expecting the people has to come with some sort of skills type of capabilities. By knowing the industry, by knowing the government, it is not penetration to the program. When we approached for the digital literacy program supporting, but most of the donors, individuals, and then investors not in a position to invest on that project. Why? I'm in puzzle in that road map. So how do we sort it out, and what are the feasibility? Though we studied the feasibility study and the assessment from the grassroots approach from the school level children, but it is not happening. So what lacking in our abilities are the something missing in the industry?
Yeah, I
Based
think
on your based on your experience, we can share some highlight on that part.
like I will not have the most relevant experience on this particular element, but I think just from a concept point of view as well, that if the need analysis is um, if the need analysis is something that is actually communicating back that there is a strong need, right? I think there might be a need where we are able to tap into like innovative solutions that might be required, right? For the community that you wish to serve, or the demography that you are engaging with, which might be uh, like as you mentioned, like be the corporates, be the government, whatever relevant entities are. There is a strong, like we can like maybe like an investment on the campaigning sides of things might be more relevant, where we are able to bring it out, look at more innovative ways of uh, bridging that gap can be like a way to look at it. One element that I want to also bring out is that uh, like it's a very overexploited concept in the sector, that if you build a project well, there will always be takers, right? If you have got the best program, like there will always be takers. Like in in the sector, there are multiple elements that are actually playing out together, and there is a need where that holistic understanding is developing, and we take on to that. I can quickly give from an example from my experience, right? In not in the exact domain, but like slightly an extension of the work that I do. So when as an organization we started to work on the aftercare program, there was limited to no understanding that existed at the broader uh, framework, not only in India but at a global level. And Make a Difference was one of the pioneer organizations that was actually engaging with the demography beyond the age of 18, right? And it was very difficult to come up with funders or people trying to back us up and all those things. And at that point, like knowing that the need is quite strong, where we did like massive need analysis, knowing that okay, like children are again going back into those vicious cycles and all those things, we came up with innovative ways of supporting those children. And like one strong element of that came in from community backing support. For the longest, the support, the scholarship fees, their housing and everything, it essentially came in from uh, the the community powered fundraising that we did. And it's only over the year of time, where be it be at a sector level or at a government level, that there is a need that started developing, and now it's like one of the most uh, addressed or looked after challenge at a problem at a national and at an international scale. I hope that answered your question to some extent.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. So moving forward, we have one more question that has been asked by Counseling and Social Impact Organization. What is the difference between need analysis and feasibility?
Yeah, I think the need analysis is a broader framework altogether, in which like feasibility can be a part to it, right? And the way to look at need analysis at this point, like especially like when you are uh, like in the context of the conversation that we had, is essentially trying to understand the problem well. Like the reason why we initially stepped like discussed about the first problem, that the Zambian problem that we discussed, right? Or the laptop problem, where unless and until you are actually able to develop the right understanding of the program, of the problem that is there on ground, it is very difficult to come up with the right solutions. You might come up with a like you, like solid programs, things like that, a lot of inputs, things like a lot of activities might be happening, but they will be off charts. They will not actually serve the need of the community. And like a good feedback of it usually comes from the beneficiary themselves, where they are like, okay, like we are doing it because we are hooked to this particular organization, or because there is some support that is coming in from the organization, but it is actually not addressing the right needs of the organization. And like just like if you just look around in the sector, I'm sure like in the corporate world, there is there is no proper definition of problem that is happening on that front. And on the other side, feasibility is essentially more inward looking, trying to figure out whether do I have the resources, whether do I have uh, uh, be it be from a money point of view, be it be from a human resource point of view, be it be from a capacity point of view, whether I have those elements at my disposal to be able to execute a project. In a If you look at it in a, especially like in a non-profit context, like feasibility as a concept is very rarely used, right? And mostly like it is tend towards corporate, like large capital funding that comes in, where like you end up hiring a consultant who goes around, do a lot of work for you, reaching out to the stakeholders, getting an idea, reaching out to the board, somebody with a non-biased approach. But I've, like from my understanding, the feasibility element is something that is relevant and equally important even at an earlier stage, even at the design level of the program, where you are able to evaluate and get an understanding, and do not run in a cycle where you are stressed out, the stakeholders are stressed out, and the entire demography community that you engage with is stressed out.
Great. Thank you so much, Sakib. We have two more questions. Probably we can take up the first question right now. That is from Sharon. Is it important to document the plan of a program and have it penned down? If yes, why? Because a lot of people that she's been speaking to mentioned that it's not really required or they have not been documenting it.
Yeah, I think Sharon, thank you so much for the question. I think so. Log framework is what, like it is essentially a tool that is giving you an understanding as to what is it that you are working towards, right? What is the input that is going in? What is the output that is coming out? What is the outcome and what is the impact, right? Unless and until you are actually putting, at least from my understanding, unless and until you are actually putting it down on a paper, on a document, to develop an understanding of uh, what's happening, right? Which is what are the activities that are happening on ground, which is impacting. It's very difficult to be able to go ahead and innovate on top of it, or to even derive learning. You might be in a space where you keep doing certain things over and over and over again, but there's a high possibility that it might not be yielding the positive results that are required. So essentially, like having a strong overview of what is happening, what is the problem that I'm trying to solve, till what's the timeline that I'm trying to serve that problem for, what is the like in a typical term, what is the lagat, which is like what's the cost that is going in, what is coming out of it, is essentially what it serves. But I think like from
Absolutely.
my understanding, having a log framework is very useful.
I think absolutely I agree to this. Like having something documented heads in probably like, multiple stages. So I think you should probably like some of the organization are not very like keen on like documenting all the stages, but I think over the years it helps in understanding the growth of the
I
organization.
think growth of the organization, alongside that, even like looking at from a scalability point of view, right?
Correct.
Like if you are an organization that is trying to solve, let's say, like poverty, right? And if there is, if you're not operating with like the right understanding of the problem, you're not understanding of what are the resources that are required, how they are deployed, what is the return that is coming on, what is the investment that is required. Like a lot of these things end up getting covered in log frameworks. Unfortunately, like in the development sector, uh, we are slightly hesitant with respect to the concept of documentation. There's a lot of execution fun and all those things that is involved, but more often not, it ends up being very limited. And if you actually want to like uh, do better projections, make more calculated decisions as an organization, it is vital that you end up like you prepare all these documents for yourself, and uh, approach it from a slightly better design thinking point of view.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sakib. We'll take last question and then we can end with today's webinar. The last question is from Garima. She's asking about few examples of like program design which have been quite effective and some link which like they can read through it.
Sure, I can share about my program. I think like the aftercare program that we designed. In fact, like the like it's a solid case study. I think like it is even taught at ISDM and some other institutes as well, where when as an organization we approached the problem of children in need of care and protection, essentially the one who have been institutionalized. We did like massive researches, mapping long-term outcomes, and according to the need of the according to the trajectory points of the demography that we serve, building out those outcomes, setting up the right monitoring and evaluations, and a lot of other organizations as well uh, uh, that have done it. I'm like, there are quite a few programs from Save who are doing it really well. Other few other organizations as well. I'm sure like maybe like I can look up for more links and share it across. In fact, like the 3 feasibility test uh, examples that we discussed uh, before the call, I did went through their case studies, look at how it is faring well and all those things, and they have done like a really solid job.
Great. Thanks a lot, Saqib. Garima will try and provide you as much as support we can from our end. We'll try to provide you with like basics and few resources as well. So yeah, thank you so much. I would like to thank
Aishwarya, you went on mute.
I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that. Garima, we will try our best to provide you with the best possible resources. Yeah, so okay, so with this, we can end with today's webinar. Thank you so much to all the participants for coming and talking a lot about like program designing and management. I think that was quite like, wonderful to have all of you together for this webinar. And I would like to thank Saqib and Make a Difference team for always supporting us and sharing wonderful insights about their organization and sharing their knowledge. So thank you so much, Saqib. It was wonderful having you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Aishwarya, as well.
Thank
In
you.
case if you would want to discuss anything further, feel free to reach out. I'm just gonna put my email ID also in the chat box in case if you would want to connect.
Yes, no problem. I'll share it later over the email as well. Okay, no
Sounds good.
problem. Okay, in case if there is anything specific that you would like to discuss with Saqib, please feel free to get in touch with us. Yeah, thanks a lot. Take care. Bye. Have a good evening. Bye.